if you're not being bullied, you are definitely on the wrong track.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it's you know. Okay, so here we go.
We're searching for sunshine. We're looking for a friendly place. A silver lining, a happy face, a little grin in that open space, and a chance to say, have a happy day.
It would be interesting because whatever we do, it means something.
True.
And we need to be aware of what we are doing. And because to exist is being aware of. And since we are awake and even dealing with sleeping problems, we'd better be attentive.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. Okay, that sounds good. I was going to say to you, what did you think of that Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein?
Oh, that was very, very interesting. That was very interesting. They are true brothers and good friends, because a good friend is someone who can tell you that you are boring. Or I found that very interesting. But it took a long time to get down to the point where he admitted that he was being cheated, and in a very bad way, and that the system which produces so-called science is a very rotten system.
Well, it made me think about yourself as well, actually.
Yeah.
Because well, for two reasons. The first one is that Brett Weinstein, I knew he was a evolutionary biologist. I know he's very clever. I've seen some of his other talks. I didn't realize how clever he was. He went to work at Evergreen State University, and when he opposed the social justice warriors, they had him thrown out. And he couldn't find a job afterwards, as good as he was. No one would want to hire him. One of the leading scientists probably in the States in this area, and no one wants to touch him. And then further to that, listening to the story where you have Nobel Prize winners doing what they're doing, and also the fact that there are drugs on the market that have been tested on, well, I suppose most drugs, a lot of drugs are tested on mice that actually are potentially harmful.
That's true, because most drugs are tested on mice to begin with. And after that, the results go to a committee, and this committee decides if there could be a limited test on people. And that is third-party funded, because someone has to pay for that. And most of the time, the health insurances are paying for that.
Yeah.
Or the industry. The pharmaceutical industry wants to have new drugs, because without new drugs, they don't earn money. And the drugs are patented for 25 years, and then the patent goes away, and generics can be made of it. So the special marketplace is gone. So they need constantly new drugs, and that's why they act like addicts and criminals.
Yeah, well, the shocking thing is that those drugs that are getting cleared from testing from mice and getting to the next level, and as you were saying, that any problems or errata or that might not get picked up in mice won't get picked up in people, at least in the short term of the sort of testing cycle. And then when it comes to fruition into the market over a period of time, it can turn out that these are very dangerous drugs.
Yes, and a simple example of that can be found in the side effects of
excuse me, side effects of. Oh, I hate this thing. Okay, here we go.
Kids are being given.
We're breaking up, Willem. I can't believe this. Sorry, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, sorry. Please, could you repeat yourself?
So, two fields of drugs with great problems. One is vaccination, and the other is cancer drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And they are not tested on the long run. Cancer drugs are obviously not tested on the long run because if you give cancer drugs to children, they will die within 6 months. Everybody ignores that. So they ignore that if you have a cancer and you are deadly anxious about your limited existence, then you're prone to be used as a guinea pig in drug research. And all drugs in cancer treatment are preliminarily allowed. They are, so to speak, trials. There's no physical evidence for working principles in cancer drugs. The same goes for vaccinations. Vaccinations are only tested for a short time, within 12 months. But you know that the most mice only live 8 months. So there's no long-term study. So we don't know what is happening. I only know that I know a couple of people who have taken very intense damages from vaccinations they couldn't cope with. They could not repair the biological damage caused by the vaccination and lost everything.
I saw, and I forgot her name. There was another lady, very clever woman. She's an endocrinologist, and she noticed something when people were coming out of surgery in her hospital. One of the hospitals she was working at, that they were pumping them full of vaccines, and she was curious about this because she kept on seeing these strange results and hormone changes and things like this, and she couldn't figure out, what was going on. And it was when she started to investigate. Sorry, I should go backwards. She then discovered that her patients were coming to her post-operative, post-treatment, with all these extra vaccines pumped into them, and she didn't see the sort of medical or scientific value to this. And she started to ask questions, and she got into trouble. She actually got fired from the hospital she worked at, and then blacklisted because she was asking questions, like scientific questions. Nothing. She's not controversial. A lot of these people, like Brett Weinstein, he's not a controversial person. In fact, some of these people that you see that question the status quo, they are far from these sort of like fringe lunatics, screaming and shouting. They're quite reasonable, sober, somber scientists. They look at facts. They want to see the facts. And then suddenly they find themselves being pushed out of their careers or the areas of specialization. They get called kooks and crazy and conspiracy theorists, and they just want to look at the facts. And they then have to try and, bargain with themselves. What do they do? Do they take what they know is true and just keep quiet, or do they try and make a change? And to make
No.
those changes
What-
are incredibly hard because they're facing like David and Goliath battles.
Yeah, but if you look at it as a battle, they do. But if you look at it in a Socratic way, Socrates took the poison and died because he was convinced that truth will come out. And it, no matter if he lived or died, that was no difference. People could kill him. He only owes one death, and he was going to die anyway. So he decided that the lifespan is not the point to measure a good life or a successful life. And the same goes for such scientists as this Weinstein man. He discovered something, wrote about it, was cheated for his knowledge, and other people made good money with it. And he knows that in the end of the day, these people are going to fade away, and his original research will pop up, and people will find that they made a big mistake. So
It's true though, but the question is that I suppose at what cost? Because
the same happened to Viktor Frankl. He was revered for his book, but as a professor for neurology, he was laughed at. He was mocked and bullied by his post-war competitors because he opposed the main systems in psychology, and that was his mistake. And you know what happened? He got a visitor from America, a lady who was sent to him by some rabbi, and this rabbi was the most influential person in the post-war Judaism, and he said, "You should not give up. Go on."
Yeah. Well, just coming to think of that, just out of curiosity, the day after listening to that talk, I listened to that talk twice because I really couldn't. The first time I listened to it, I was just dumbstruck, and the second time I listened to it, I was like, "Is this really true? Does this really happen? I mean, pardon my French, how the fuck is this possible? How is it possible? I mean." It's such a serious thing. I mean, potentially millions of people have, I don't know, billions, but tens of millions of people have been hurt. For what? So that someone with their Nobel Prize can just walk around and smile, pretending like they're some kind of smart ass, and it's just mind blowing.
It's mind-blowing. On the other hand, it comes down to the attitude. If you are at something which is very important and you can prove your point, then you have to proceed because the world is waiting for it. Not the world of science, not the world of your competitors who have a big income and take the honors, and you take the bow. That's how life works.
True, but this also raised an interesting question, which is what I wanted to talk to you also about today. Before, we've been discussing logo philosophy and logotherapy. Is Eric Weinstein? He termed something called the intellectual dark web, and it can sound quite controversial in a way, but it isn't, because what it is, it's that he's identified people like his brother, himself even included. I mean, Eric is a mathematician and physicist.
Yeah.
And if you try and rock the boat of convention, and these guys aren't trying to be controversial for the sake of controversy. They're just looking at facts and the truth, That's the most bizarre thing. But then again, we can touch on it at some other point. Something I heard interestingly, actually, in one of Eric's other conversations. I think it was with a rabbi, and he said it was interesting. Like, I think it was Eric, or maybe it was the rabbi. He said something along the lines of, if you want the truth about life, you speak to the religious. If you want the truth about the sort of physical world, you speak to the scientists. He said that, ultimately for a human, yes, it's interesting to have all these facts about science and the world and physics and, chemistry, but ultimately the human truth is more important, because that's what we live. We live that, we have to live that. But going back to the dark web, because I wouldn't say suspicious of it, but I just wondered, why use this term? Because originally, like, the dark web, as most people understand it, is the sort of hidden black market that runs under the internet, where sort of various illegal activities happen. I suppose maybe Eric was being a little bit tongue in cheek by saying, it's sort of illegal to tell the truth, and that's the weird thing. It's illegal in a way, and I say that with air quotes, to put out the facts, and say, well, this is what's happening, really happening. But it's counterintuitive to what we think, the kind of the truth is. What do you think about it?
Yeah, you're right. Please take into account that scientists are just like you and me. Mm-hmm. Scientists are people who have not a very, very high self-esteem, because they're not trained to be in self-esteem, but they are in love with themselves because they are so clever. So this being clever is a kind of compensation for their lack of attention. Most of these scientists are people who look like shit, and so, excuse me for the word, but they do look like shit. They don't take care of their exterior. They don't go to the dentist. They don't even clip their nails or cut their hair. They look awful, so they compensate that with power games. Science is a language of power games. And, a recognized scientist is the one who has the most quotes in a list, which is more or less like being in a zoo, and or with kids growing up who can pee the farthest. Or even in nature, in biology, being on top of the hierarchy is a bad game for humankind.
Yeah.
It's not our game. It's the game of our nephews and cousins in the animal world, but it's not a human game. It is an impossible game for humans.
Yeah.
And that is where the bad things happen, because people tend to believe that being the most clever, being the most influential, being the most famous, being the most admired one is the best one. It's not. Look at Judaism. The Messiah, as described in the first century, was a guy who was so small you had to climb into a tree in order to see him. Everybody was looking for the greatest of all rabbis, and he was the smallest of all. So you see, it's a perspective, a question of perspective. How do you look at yourself? How do you look at your own accomplishment? Giving birth to a truth is very, very long taking process. Is very painful, and if you suffer for what you found, it's okay. You didn't inflict that on yourself. The others inflicted them. inflict this upon themselves. Being neglected and ignored is not touching me, it's touching those who did that.
True.
It's their problem, not my problem. And that's where Mr. Weinstein is right. He belongs to the meek, and that's okay. He's humble.
He's very humble. I mean, he's an incredible. I have such tremendous respect for him now. Really, like he's not angry. It's just he wasn't.
He's not even bitter.
Not bitter.
No.
You know.
He could be a bus driver in Louisiana, whatever. It doesn't matter for him. He has found this. He has put this on paper. He knows he's right. He knows the proof is there. He is the author, and others take the alphabet and make money.
Yeah. I must say that it was very also touching to see his big brother, who obviously loves him so much, sitting there getting angry and frustrated with him. Like, just tell the truth, get it out, you know. And almost like it was almost like his brother wanted him to get a bit pissed off, but Eric is so calm, and he loves his brother back. He understands that, okay, well, you know, because his brother is really furious for him. It shows just a lot of love that they have for each other. But what kind of struck me, and this is what brings me around to what I wanted to talk to you about, actually, is that, you know, at the end of the day, I think what Eric has done is put out into the world for free. This is my paper. Read it, take it as you want it. You know, the truth is the truth, and then whatever comes from that comes from that. And in a way, I thought to myself, well, you know, that they continue to their conversation. I'm not sure if it was that conversation or another one that I listened to, because I've listened to a few now from the portal. I think he was talking to Eric Thiel and maybe Sam Harris about institutions, today's institutions. There was a conversation they had about how institutions today are really failing, particularly in the academic sense, failing society and also their students, because they were talking, I didn't realize that the peer review process, which was only really meant to be for one specific type of evaluation of studies, is now applied across the board and is so easy to abuse that you can push through studies that are essentially meaningless. Oh, how long was that contact lost for? Where was I? Willem? I can hear myself. Okay, it's funny. I can hear you, but I don't know. It's so weird. Like, where was I?
I got a message from that there was a net.
Oh, okay. Where was I in my conversation there?
It's no problem. It confirms what Jordan Peterson says about the scientific system that reproduces nerds and nitwits instead of promoting science and learning young people to think and decide.
This is exactly what I was getting at, going towards, and that's
the core element.
I thought to myself in terms of the teachings of, and I'm not going to point fingers, and I know you won't, at the people who hold, shall we say, the power to disseminate Frankel's work, the ones who put themselves in positions of power to be the gatekeepers, that essentially, in a way, you have to do what they can't do, and that is to give it all away, literally give it away for free. To teach it.
No, it's not quite what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
The gatekeepers are the ones that first started the institutes, because Frankl had stopped training people. He trained psychiatrists and neurologists in the university, but he never trained logotherapy. He never did that.
Uh-huh.
So one of the psychologists, a clinical psychologist called Elisabeth Lucas, studied in Vienna and wrote her dissertation with a test, logo test, on Frankel's work and proved a point that he was right.
Okay.
Nowadays, it's without any question the whole world confronted with its own end and with the end of humankind is confronted with the questions of meaning. That is a question including intuition and conscience.
Mm-hmm.
No?
Yes.
So the primary motivation is nothing else but the combination of conscience and intuition about meaning. And meaning is the core element. Mm-hmm. That's why I wrote this little line about what does meaning mean. No? Mm-hmm. There's no question about it. But Frankl never trained psychologists or trained logotherapists. He gave up on that.
Do you mind if I ask you, what was his reason for that?
I don't know.
Well, what could you... I mean,
I met him. He was already retired, and he said to me, don't go to me, try your luck with Mrs. Lucas. And the institutes existing then, that was the Institute of Mrs. Lucas in Fürstenfeldbruck. Mm-hmm. There was an institute in Hamburg, mit Uwe Böschemeyer. There was an institute also in southern Germany, in Stuttgart, glaube ich, I believe, with in the theological faculty there were German institutes, and there were institutes in America, and in South America. Their logotherapy was part of the APA, admitted, allowed training, and for educational points. So I went to America and studied with one class with Jerry Long, the famous Jerry Long, the man who was paralyzed from his neck down. Mm-hmm. He was a great teacher, and he supported my work.
Okay.
And with Gina Giovinco, who was also passed away in 2011, who was a registered nurse and a professor of education in the University of Florida. So these people were the beginning, and maybe I'm with those people because I started this institute in the Netherlands.
Sure.
Only 5 years after Mrs. Lucas started that in Fürstenfeldbruck. She was only 5 years underway, and then I founded my institute in Holland.
But just my kind of question is then, and I know obviously you can't answer on behalf of Dr. Frankl. I just have to wonder. I wouldn't say what was his reason. Obviously, we'll never know that. But I wouldn't say not for not promoting it, but. I've lost my train of thought.
Well,
I'm just wondering. Mm-hmm.
Frankl got his PhDs and his honorary professorships all over the world. So he decided that he was not stooping so low as to pledge for his work. His work was well established. Mm-hmm. And scientifically proven, as you can read in his about theory and therapy of neurosis, mm-hmm. translated James Dubois. It's a great work. You should have that.
What's it called again?
Theory of? It's called the theory and therapy of neurosis. Mm-hmm. Viktor Frankl. In English, it's translated by James Dubois. I happen to have one copy of it. Uh-huh. And it's a marvelous translation because it was a theory and therapy of neurosis. It's quite a difficult book because it does not use the DSM or the IDC terminology, mm-hmm. which we know are agreements and not scientific facts. Also, we already talked about mental health diagnosis, no?
Correct.
Mental health conditions.
Correct.
And they are these DSM and IDC are categorizing mental conditions into mental disorders or personality disorders or behavioral problems. But there is no clinical evidence that these conditions are true maladies. There are only conditions, and there are suggestions how to do that, how to deal with it. Although the insurance companies and state organizations turn the argument around and say, that's the protocol, you have to treat that way. You can't do anything else.
I see.
That's it. The same barriers are in medicine. If you decide to follow your intuition and your clinical knowledge, then you are in deep trouble. You have to treat your patients by the book, and the book is written by those who prevent progress.
It's interesting you touch on that, because that's something else that Eric Weinstein touched on, and saying that a lot of the positions that are held in academia and also within industry are held by what he calls the boomer generation. And I've never really, I don't, there's this meme right now called OK Boomer. When someone from the boomer generation says something, it's like gospel fact, and you can't question it. I never quite, it was my own ignorance that, sometimes it's difficult to tell with something that's so amorphous, like which we call academia, who is really holding the power. But it seems that, from what I can tell, maybe you can give some insight into this, that we're being held back from actually treating problems, helping people, improving everyone's lives, because there's this philosophy or this attitude that is not open to change. It really is just quite closed. It's like, no, we're not going to change. This is the way it is, and we're going to maintain the power structures, and even in the face of new evidence. It's just like, what, and it's also causing, I think it's one of the, and I'm speaking just from my own intuition, it's one of the causes why we have so many of these problems today, these additional problems, multiplication of issues.
Yeah, the point is, in the field of mental conditions, that people live inside out. And so we are being brought up with expectations. What do you expect from life? And what misses is sobriety and acknowledging that we are fallible and that we are transient. Which means that death is a very imminent part of our lives, and death decides about meaning.
True.
It forces us into asking ourselves questions about meaning. That's what death does. It's not the end of only the end of my physical condition. It's also the instance that forces me to use my time to the best of my abilities.
So with this institutionalized, I don't even know what to call it. I wouldn't call it a roadblock or
it's a
bottleneck.
Science is a kind of foreign language. If you speak the foreign language well enough, you may play in the field. If you don't speak the language well enough, you're out. And it's like the Catholic Church, the dogma, the teachings of the Catholic Church are more important than the biblical teaching. The tradition prevails over the gospel. And that is the problem. The problem is we have dogmas in science, like within the Catholic Church, and every sane person says, can't be true. I can't submit my conscience and my intellect to that. It's impossible. Oh, that's three. We have intuition, intellect, and conscience. That's 3 items, 3 instances that are critical. And if you don't submit those 3, forget it. You don't play ball. And if you feel that playing ball is very important, as I used to feel, because I am a human being and I wanted to be recognized for my work and my input and my efforts in the fields in which I specialized. But that's vanity. And I had to find out about vanity the hard way. I don't, what do you say? I don't deplore that. It's true. Mm-hmm. Vanity is one of the driving forces for frustration and compensation. And I was part of that.
Do you think then, Professor, that in a way you need to be, I wouldn't call it dispassionately detached from these sorts of endeavors when you are genuinely doing your best to make a contribution, but you do the work, you tell the truth as best as possible, and you let it be. You let it live on its own. It's like having a child. You can bring it up to a certain degree, and then from there on, it has to make its own choices or be accepted or rejected.
Real true. You can carry a horse to the water, but he has to drink by himself.
True.
So that is, I contributed my part to a lot of people's lives. That's my job, to help people find out how to improve their lives. Mm-hmm. And the systematics about that, I wrote down on paper, and the files are my heritage, and it's going to be either it's going to be saved by someone like you or Peter, mm-hmm. or it's out there, and I'm sure that I'm not a very exceptional person. It's not that important. I'm sure that the knowledge will survive. The insight will survive. Wisdom will survive. And I borrowed all what I know. I just borrowed it. It's not mine.
I think at the end of the day, that is the real truth of everything, because, even with Brett, he learned from other people, and, he used a methodology, and,
Yes, he happened to stumble about it.
I mean, even Newton said that. Yeah. I mean, what was he said about standing on the shoulders of giants? Even Einstein said that. He said something along the lines, and Einstein made a joke about it. He said, "The whole trick to doing good science is to hide your sources."
Yeah.
And Einstein laughed, but Einstein actually, in another way, he actually did acknowledge those people with whom he had drawn inspiration from. So I have to, give him some credit for that. He wasn't at the end of the day, he wasn't a very, he was, I suppose, arrogant in one way, but in another way, he wasn't at all. Same with Brett Weinstein, who's a bit fired up, but at the same time, also a humble man.
Just remember the one person who found out about numbers. Mm-hmm. is more outstanding than any scientist living today.
True.
The one who designed alphabet is, I don't mean Google, but the 26 things in which we can express every single thought we ever come up with. This person is the greatest scientist.
Yeah.
And we are humble servants of that. And we cannot prey on that.
Unfortunately, people just don't respect that anymore. Or a vast majority. But that's another thing which I was thinking about, is that in a way you have to operate, and maybe it comes into interesting, I wouldn't call it conflict, but contrast to, my kind of commercial education where you're trying to sell everything to everyone. But ultimately with certain things, you put them out there for the ones who are looking to find them, and that's all you do it for. You don't try and target anyone. You don't try and convert them, or you don't try and take on an aggressive process of saying you must accept this. It's like, take it for what it is. Find the truth. If there's truth there for you, and people who know the truth, they know it. They it's like almost an intangible way. You just nod. I understand. I get it. I get it. And that's, I think, sometimes, and I admit for myself, I'm also dealing with my own ego and thoughts like this. I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned earlier on about how difficult it is to try and bring something forward. And I mean, at the moment, I started last night to try and synthesize some of my ideas. It was incredibly hard just to make a start, but I did something, and I was like, is this any good? It's probably garbage, but anyway, let me just do it. And then I realized right there and then that this is going to take many, many years. So I mean, the reason why I'm laughing is that coming from an advertising background, you just don't get that time. You have 2 weeks to come up with an idea which is supposed to solve all the problems that they have. And that's another funny thing about doing a lot of stuff in business communications. The ambition is on a scale far greater than I suppose what some religions would put as their goals. And somehow either an individual or 3 or 4 people are going to somehow crack this huge problem. And it's really funny to think of all the hubris and ego that goes into all this stuff, because it's ultimately just nonsense. You have to laugh at it.
That's why I wrote my first line. Meaning is doing the right thing the right way with the right intention and doing it now. And there's no natural law saying that you can collect the fruits from that.
No. In fact,
if it were to be paid for or recollected, it would be no contribution.
Sure. Well, it would be commodified, and then it has a variable value, which can be discarded at any point in time or reinvented, and you can actually sully it. You can start to like the truth is the truth, as I was saying. Like 1 + 1 is 2. You can't just start adding on extra things to try and make it something else, because then it corrupts it. It loses its value. It becomes worthless. It's like you were telling me before, actually, several years ago. We were having a discussion about the color pink, and it was you said you have red and you have white. You drop 1 drop of red into white and you have pink. You will never get the red back. That's true. It's the truth of the matter. It's blending. It becomes something else. There's nothing wrong with it becoming something else, but you still never have red if that's what you wanted.
I think it's very important to remain this to preserve a contribution by not making it into a sellable product. We can teach people how to understand the secrets of logotherapy. That's okay. And for time we are going to be paid, but for logotherapy we cannot be paid. Because it's common knowledge.
That's exactly what I was thinking. So this is actually where I was going towards. Because funny enough, when we were talking before, I was thinking of a way to, and I feel bad about it now, like monetize. That's the big word. How do we make money out of this? And it wasn't from a sense of, I'll be honest with you, it wasn't from a sense of greed. It was more like, okay, so we need money to, this is my line of thinking. Well, it's almost like a museum. If you have a museum and you want to keep the exhibits open, you need money to pay for the lights and power, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But these are ideas, and these can live on without the need for money. So I came to the conclusion. I was like, well, we have to give this away for free. We literally, and it's a labor of love, to be honest, to actually teach this and to be part of this process with you. So I realized, okay, well, I actually don't, and this is really interesting, I don't care about the money. It's not the money I'm doing it for. It's actually the fact that I love you, I love myself. When I mean not myself as the ego, but my capacity to want to do something. I love life. I love this earth where we're on, and I don't really want to see going to hell or turning into a hell. And I think, well, maybe one way we can help, and I don't know if I have no idea if it's going to work, and I know it's going to go way beyond the time that you and I are talking to each other in heaven somewhere, or who knows where else. It's the right thing to do, to push this into the world and say, you know what, for those who want it, they will take it. And I think that in a way, it's so interesting about people that they will share that with other people. It's almost like they call it like an idea virus. It will spread from one to another. That, and I think people really actually are desperate for something right now. They're desperate. People are desperate.
That's true. They are desperate, and that's why the questions of meaning are nowadays in a central position. All other questions seem to fade away because people are conscious about the limited times and limited possibilities we have left, and we need to explore what is in our best capacities to make this world sustainable and livable for our grandchildren, and that is why it is such a focal question. People who want to be taught this method can read and can get education. And it's not in a university, which is a great advantage because it cannot be monopolized.
Correct. And this is actually what my thought was after listening to Brett and Eric, and also the other guys, was like, we can't institutionalize this. It can't be made into an institution, because obviously you need institutions for those who want to have professional qualifications. But I think you and I are talking to people, everyone. We're talking to everyone. That's my goal, to talk to everyone, because I know that everyone is not going to be like, I wouldn't say like you and I. There will be a false equivalency. I'm a student. Possibly a practitioner as well, but you are in a way, you're my master, you're my teacher, and I mean it with a great deal of respect and humility. And I think we have the opportunity to take this to people and say, okay, it doesn't have to be as dramatic or as, we can't take away the pain, but we can help you to find a way to find a meaning to it, a reason to live above and beyond, because you realize that you can't buy it. You cannot buy this.
No, you can't buy meaning, and you can't buy health, and you can't buy future. That's impossible.
No.
And you can't buy happiness. And there are other things you can't buy, but you cannot live without them.
Exactly. And
that is why it's so fundamental. It's not just fundamental to mental health. It's fundamental to social health as well.
Correct.
And, which it's called a community. And if we are not in a community doing what life is requiring from us and doing it with joy, then we are not together. And when we are divided and we remain divided, the world will perish. That's quite simple.
I do think, if things continue as they are, really as they are, I do see very, very bad very bleak things ahead of us, because who was it? Someone else was
You don't
talking.
have to.
Someone else
You
was
don't have.
Mhm.
If you start acting as if the future was there, and we all would, if we all would start acting, if our future is as bright as possible, then the world will change into this future.
I absolutely
Because
agree with
as
you.
we know from science, virtual and actual are simultaneously.
Yeah, it's true.
This quantum physics, the
true.
new quantum physics says the virtual world and the actual world are simultaneously. And we can choose in which of these worlds we live. If we change our lifestyles to live the future instead of living on the past. Today I said to someone, there's an old Chinese proverb, the more of your past you collect and keep, the less place there is left for future.
Yeah.
It's not an old Chinese proverb. I thought about it. This guy who has been trained in China is a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
He publishes pictures of him 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and I always have the feeling if I see those pictures that he is sad about leaving China, leaving his past behind. And if you do that, if you regret your past and keep going with it, there's no place for your future.
True. Well, that's another thing. It sounds like such a cliche, but there was another person. I must really start to put notes on these things, but I know it's sort of a cliche, but they were talking about oh yes, I know what it was. There was that doctor I also sent you a link to about he's a neurologist and he discusses addiction.
Yeah.
Okay. He was really interesting, and he was talking about he was really bad at addict, but look at him now, such a different human being. And if he had remained in the past, he wouldn't be where he is now. And he said that what's brought him up to here today was where he came from, and he built on that. He didn't live in it. He took the lesson and he moved on. But that's, I think, a problem that many of us have, particularly in times of stress. We then refer back to the past. Oh, it was better then, something, in like Dutch, like the joke would be vroeger, which means beforehand. Vroeger was dit, blah, 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 blah. And, yes, it was better back in the day. People think about back in the day.
Those were the days. Archie Bunker.
Exactly. And it's
poor Edith.
Yeah.
Stifled.
I think actually Archie Bunker, people, I don't know how many people who are listening to us today, but just should go check it out. It's actually worth revisiting, because in a way, he's a good person to take a perspective from. And sometimes we do need those grumpy characters, the ones that they're not really grumpy, that sometimes they're just being somber or sober about the world, or even about their own mistakes and misgivings.
He refers to a time in which everyone pulled his weight.
Yeah.
And that's what in modern days seems to be obsolete. If you put your money in bitcoins, you don't have to work at all. You get rich without doing anything, without contributing anything, without producing anything. So what was value vanishes by such parasites.
But Willem, what's interesting? Have you heard of the term funployment? It's like, okay. I mean, I'm not saying that the value of someone fun unemployment.
I'm saying that we employ such people. They want work-life balance, and they really want a free time contract.
Yeah, that's actually what they're negotiating.
Yeah, a free time contract, and they are not with their soul and heart with our practice, and that's no. I don't put that up as a, what do you call that? I don't hold that against them.
Yeah.
But that's the time spirit. The time spirit tells people that they need to be developing themselves, and but not in the field in which they are good, but in the field of doing nothing.
Yeah, it's it's as if you can't combine the two, and you should, because as you know, for my full-time job, I do not do. I'm not a logotherapist. I work in business. I do use what I learn. I mean, in the current situation that I'm working with, I'm applying the principles that I've learned, and looking after the business, look after the employees, look after myself in the same way, show respect, and take on my responsibility. As I said, I don't do this as a full-time job, and I do volunteer work as well, and that I find fulfilling. Sometimes I don't particularly enjoy the commercial job I have, but the weather isn't great every day.
There are two sides. I work as a bus driver in Pennsylvania. I work in a dental practice as a helping hand, and in my life, development meant reading books, getting education, become better in what you do.
Yeah.
And modern life doesn't read books, doesn't want to get better in what they do, and that's why they need help in precarious situations, because they don't manage to. They don't even have the self-confidence on doing such things, because they didn't practice it. And if they could have practiced it, there was spare time, and that was more important.
It's interesting you mention that for two reasons. The first is Werner Herzog, and the second is a kung fu master called Ip Man. Ip Man was Bruce Lee's original teacher, and he said the most important thing in life you go into with is with self-confidence. You must be confident. He didn't mean arrogant, because he was a very humble man for what he was. Yes. But he said you must confidently go into the world, and he was all about doing the right thing. Really an interesting character. But I'll switch back to Werner Herzog. Once again, I'll refer back to, he had a very great chat. I love Werner Herzog. He's a really interesting guy. He was talking to Eric Weinstein, and Werner said, someone asked them, what do you think, what are the most influential books you should read? Famous people are always asked, what are their influences? And Werner Herzog said, I don't want to give you a list of books that I read because I find them important. He said, it's more important for you to find the books that you find important to read. He said,
True.
but the problem is, the problem is the question you're asking me. And the guy was like, what? He said, do you read? And the guy said, no. And he said, you know what? All great things come from reading. He said,
yeah. He
actually contributed his success as such to reading. He said, the focus you get, you get more out of it than what you put. And he said, no educated person can call themselves educated who doesn't read, or who wants to be educated and wants to learn. And he said it's one of the great sadnesses he feels that people just don't read anymore. They don't want to.
So we have electronic media, we have Facebook, we have WhatsApp, we have Twitter, and that's all we need. Many people think that way. Reading means reading Twitter.
Correct, but also another thing.
And falling for the poison of an American president, or a German neo-Nazi, or whatever, or
kind of a French populist, or who's the guy in Hungary? I don't know.
Yeah, I know
Loads
him.
of them. I mean, even over here in the Czech Republic,
It's
they have
he is he is an urban type.
even over here in the Czech Republic, you've got a former head of what was the sort of the Czech version of the KGB in a
Yep.
serious position of power, and Putin now wants to become like leader for life. But another interesting thing is that in terms of real conversations, people don't
He
want
must
to.
be he must be really anxious about his future.
I think so. Well, I mean, as someone commented, it was Gary Kasparov. He said Putin cannot afford not to be in power because once he's out, then they're going to come for him.
Yep.
You know, and that's that's the situation he's in.
Yep.
Yeah, he has to stay in power. But the thing is, with people, and I suppose we're all a little bit guilty of this, is that also our attention spans are somewhat narrow. And I know we chatted, I mean, today is a long format chat, but we are going to do some shorter chats as well, because more to the point on specific topics. But I know that your concern was, and it was mine actually at the beginning too, that people just are not going to listen. And I understand. Okay, maybe some of them won't, but I do think that if you start to listen and you manage to get through at least one long talk, you might realize maybe there's something interesting these guys are talking about, not necessarily for myself or yourself, but for them. It's about them. I'm not, it's about, I want to help other people.
That's my job. I help other people. I give help to help them find their own way to a meaningful and dignified life. And that begins with an attitude. And you can't change your life without the attitude.
Mm.
You can build upon experiences, but you need the attitude to decide which experience do I collect.
Yeah.
No? And what do I do with my experiences? Learning by doing, which is making mistakes, standing up until you stand and walk.
Mm.
No? So the most of the logotherapy teaching people mention the attitudinal values in the last place.
Uh-huh.
That's wrong. The whole human dignity begins with the last one, with the attitude. The attitude decides. It's the divine part of the spirit, of the human spirit, which I defined in terms of intellect, conscience, and intuition.
Mm.
Ruled by love, that decides. That is decisive. If you want to live a human life, a life in dignity, a life with values, a meaningful life, start with the attitude.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because, and I really apologize for forgetting his name, that gentleman, he discusses addiction. He talked about some of the kind of processes that people take. What they do is they start with, like, particularly with alcoholism or any kind of addiction, but he used alcoholism as an example. It was like the actual experience of life narrowed itself down. You keep on, that you focus down into this little dark hole, which is where you get stuck in. And it's once you start to see outside of where your mind is going or where you are going, that that you move out of it. He said that once people start to move away from I wouldn't call it the triggers, but the kind of environmental factors and the psychological factors, once they start to expand and then change their attitude, that's when they actually start to conquer their addictions.
That's true. The attitude decides about responsibility, and you cannot change anything without being responsible.
True.
So that is why we need to start with the attitude, to talk about the attitude. Life is shit, I know. We are all going to die in it.
Mm.
No, I've never met anyone who didn't. Yeah. And we came into the world by suffering, or through suffering, We could not avoid to suffer during being born. And we couldn't get to stand up without suffering. We fell down all the time.
Yeah.
And when we first finished standing up, a new kind of suffering started by falling down, learning to go. If you don't let go of your equilibrium, you will never step forward. So we had to learn that. And that's the whole process. It is nothing else. It's the whole process. The attitude is, I want to step forward. I want to be a human being. I live from my dignity. I live a meaningful life. And then I step forward. And if I get what we said in our first talk, if I'm not being bullied during this process, I'm definitely on the wrong track. So I need to be, I need to overcome the obvious blockages other people from fear and greed have put up. I have to go through that.
But the thing that I kind of, I wouldn't say worry about, but I'm concerned about is that it would appear that in some ways it's only in later life that a lot of people, once they've burned through all the different storylines and they've gone through all the myths and they suddenly find themselves, they've just run out of social myths and conventions, and they're left kind of standing alone at a bus stop going like there's no more buses to take because they're all gone, and maybe you have to start walking yourself, that you've ridden along the lines of all these other ideas, and I wouldn't say it's too late, but in a way I try to think to myself, how is it possible that we can get the message down to younger people who probably could, can you imagine if you could somehow express this not just knowledge and wisdom, but this information rather, give it to them, because I think they can reason it out and test it for themselves and go, I don't have to wait until I'm in my late 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or whenever it comes to you, but it's going to be quite a long way down the line when they can say, actually, I don't need to go make all these silly mistakes. I don't have to sort of plunge myself into despair. I don't think it's necessary for someone to have to develop, an unhealthy relationship with food or drink or drugs or power, or because that's also something that happens. How do we then address the younger generations as the parents you talk to, or the teachers, or it's just one question that sticks in my mind. How do we get to those people?
Well,
those young people.
Young people want to grow up. That's their only wish. They want to be adults. They want to be able to do what adults are doing, what their parents are doing, but not like their parents. Puberty is the time when your parents become obnoxious. Huh?
Yeah.
So you have to go through that. Learning by doing, making mistakes. Without making mistakes, you can't learn. And obviously, learning is the thing that we are here for.
True. Do you think
so? We need to teach, and we can only teach in a way that motivates and inspires people. That's why let's say, to develop one's talents. And I don't mean in arts and being special. Like today, everyone is very special, which means they don't have to involve in social structures. They're exempted from that.
Yeah.
But to start with the attitude, to help children find a true humane attitude towards life, which is not expecting that life is a pony park in which you can be satisfied whatever you need may be, but to teach them to invest themselves. Life is waiting for us. Life is asking us, or in a religious term, Shem is depending on us. Yeah? God depends on people. It's not people depending on God.
Yeah.
That's why people, if really shit happens, people ask me as a minister, why does God allow?
Sorry?
Why did God allow this suffering? And I had to say, God doesn't allow suffering like this. Suffering exists because we fail to understand that God depends on us.
Yeah.
And that is why science has developed. Science has only developed because life, or God, is requiring development. We are on a big journey, and the journey is not finished. So make children want to join the journey.
Yeah. Do you think that it seems that an interesting, I wouldn't call it segment, but generation is the one that follows, like right now, the millennials are making a lot of noise. It seems that the generation after them are watching them and going, we don't want to be like this, because, and I don't want to poke fun at all millennials or even mock them, but a fair few of them that I've met, they are the biggest complainers I've ever met, and apparently in my generation, the Generation X, we're the slackers, like, I think in many ways my generation is a silent generation. We just get on and do stuff. We don't talk about it so much, but the generation that came after us, man, they like to complain about everything.
That's what Frank already said about the second generation after the war. They're spoiled rotten.
Do you think it maybe sort of skips generation in a way? Because
no, it's we all want our children to have a better life than we ourselves had. And so we are putting our children up with this load of unfulfilled dreams and uncompleted wants. And those children can't do anything but to repeat what they are being fed with.
Okay.
And never forget that the parents of generation of your generation, that was called, those were called the lost generation. They, in the Western Hemisphere, they lived through the big crisis of the 1980s, where no one got a job. There was no way forward. There was austerity, unlimited, and I remember the despair of my sister and my wife, well-educated, no job, wanting to contribute, no chance.
Yeah.
No one would help them. And, they were, let's say, they were superfluous.
Yeah.
The economy changing into digital, from analog into digital. That was happening. And in digital economy, people are not wanted. People make mistakes, robots don't.
True.
And auto factories changed from people to robots. You can't produce a quality car without robotics. It's impossible. In the 70s and 80s, cars were already rusting on the advertisement.
It's interesting because the only way to do that, you need to be a luxury brand where they can afford to spend all their time getting everything right. But in a mass manufactured world, it's not possible to spend it.
It's
the
not
level of
possible.
time. They just can't afford it.
And if you are a victim from such development, or you happen to have the bad luck to live your adulthood in such a time, you get neurotic people. That is no great news. And neurotic people getting children raise neurotic children.
That's true.
And that's your generation, and they have children who can't be soothed because what they really missed is personal attention.
Well, you know
Love.
what's interesting about this as well, and I think if people assume that suddenly there's this natural progression, this logarithmic progression of things always getting better, again, sometimes this is interesting when you can refer back to history, once again referring back to, should we say the 1600s, there was a generation that basically, because of, economy those days really ran around agriculture. So agriculture determined the economic value of the actual economy. And in times of famine, there was 5 years, I think it was 1690 to about 1695 or 1694 to 1698. There were 4 years of famine. And not only was it difficult to get food, but when the kind of economy turned down, then the people who were hiring people to work on the land, that they called them husbandry, the men who were doing the farm laboring, the husbandry men or whatever they called. They couldn't find jobs, so they had problems earning income then. That there were times during those that in that one particular period, it's documented, there just wasn't enough work for everyone to get paid properly, and so people were, there was this sort of gentleman, this lecturer from Yale was discussing a story of one guy, and this gentleman was going up and down the country from place to place to try and find work to sustain himself. And in a way, it just reminded me, it was like, hang on a second, it sounds really familiar to the age we live in, when there's a downturn in the economy, everyone, except maybe the kind of top shelf, small minorities, everyone has a hard time. So it's cyclical in a way, it's just, there are going to be tough times, and I don't think that we can have this kind of unrealistic expectation that things are always going to be good. And that's, I think, one of the big problems that I think a lot of maybe the millennials, they're whinging and moaning about the fact that they can't buy property. Well, go back a couple of 100 years and it's the exact same situation. Those guys were like, well, we can't afford this stuff either, so we'll have to just make do. And lo and behold, we're still here. It's just because they had it good doesn't mean you're going to have it good. It's unrealistic to expect that.
That's true. So we have tried to make life as sweet as possible. We have told our children that medicine is going to solve any problem, and if medicine doesn't, science will. And look what we have end up with.
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't. It's impossible. It is not impossible for science to solve problems, and it's not for medicine. It's not impossible for medicine to find medication and solutions. But the cause of suffering is not removed.
Yeah, that you can't treat.
That you can't treat. That's right. The only way of treating illness is remain healthy.
Exactly.
Live, do healthy.
But I think there's another problem that comes into that, is that, and again, it's something else that I sent to you, that lady discussing mental health and diet, nutrition. It's something that I'd intuitively thought about before, and this came off the bat of me looking at plant-based diet versus, sort of a combination of other things. And as it turns out, there's enough evidence and certain case studies to suggest that there's a strong correlation between it sounds common sense, between mental health and nutrition. That if the body is not well, that the mind is going to be affected too. You can't expect, it's like if you walk into Chernobyl and it's radioactive as hell, and you walk out, and you've absorbed all this energy, and you get sick. How did this happen? Well, you were just in a nuclear war zone site. That's what's going to happen.
I have 2 books from the early 80s from an American medical professor, assistant professor from the UCLA about food and mental health, mental illnesses.
What's his name, Willem? Do you know?
Mervyn. I don't have the books here in this.
Oh, okay. No problem.
So
what did he say?
But this man collected all the scientific evidence about all types of illnesses appearing connected to the way people live, what they eat. And I can't get to his name. The books are extremely expensive.
Okay.
The second copy I paid almost $200 for it.
Wow.
It's the second volume. And I do have them. And there's a correlation between mental health and food. And it's no big wonder if you eat a lot of sweet stuff, which is in the body functions acid. You create an environment in which inflammation thrives.
Yeah.
So, in correlation to the COVID virus, which is coming, for people who are over 40 and having bronchial or lung problems, this is the target group. You stay away from everything what makes you which enlarges your acid level.
Okay.
So acid, the degree of acidity in your bodily fluid, not your blood, but the interstitial fluid, the fluid in which your cells are swimming. Because through this fluid, they become nourishment, and through this fluid, they get rid of their end products. Each cell is like a living fish. You can study dead cells, which medicine does, but then you have a corpse.
Correct.
If you start looking at living cells, and lots of scientists have done that, Alfred Pischinger, in the 60s did that. His name is connected to the Alfred Pischinger system, which is the cell the living cell in its environment. So you have to make an integral picture. Getting back to the acids, the level of acid is the level of sugar you take. Now, if you look at your ingredient list of food, you find sugar anywhere, everywhere. You can't even buy a sausage without sugar. So what you do is you take extra minerals to find a new equilibrium, and you do that on a daily basis. If you have taken food, you also take minerals, because alkaloid and acid are an equilibrium.
That is, where did I write that down? You just actually touched on something that I was looking at the other day about alkaloids and how they break down in the body. And also, it's interesting you mentioned this, that
potassium, calcium, all those things. You need magnesium. You need to function. You need minerals.
Yep. phytic acid, lectins, and the toxicity of your body.
Yeah.
Because you can actually create, I hate to say this in this term, but a toxic waste dump inside your body. You can look healthy, but you are really sick.
Read. It's right. Our food is turning us into a waste dump, a chemical waste dump.
Yeah.
And if you on top of that take medicine, drugs, there's no difference between drugs and medical drugs. They're all changing your metabolism.
Correct.
They're changing the life expectancies of your cell. They make cellular damages. And we are back with Mr. Weinstein.
Correct. Yeah.
So learn from him.
He's got a lot to say. Yeah, he was.
Speaking.
Sorry. I keep on interrupting you. Pardon me. You were saying?
He was speaking the truth.
Yeah, it's and the one thing which I must be honest, which I've spoken to a few therapists. The one thing which I've never been asked, and this is two vital questions actually. How much do you sleep? What's your sleeping pattern like? And what's your food like? No one has ever asked those questions. They just...
And when do you wake up during the night?
Yeah, they just deal with, shall we say, the symptomatic side or the sort of subjective symptomatic side, and they take that approach of, well, let's just talk it out. And then it's just nothing to do with the fact that, because I think probably, and I don't want to put a number to this because I have no idea, but I would imagine a fair few people, if they actually just slept better and ate better, they wouldn't have as many of these perceived problems as possible. It doesn't mean they're not going to feel anxiety or stress. It's just that the coping mechanisms they have will be far superior.
Coping mechanisms are equal the repair mechanism.
Exactly.
So, because there is a psychosomatic parallelism. So what happens in the psyche happens also in the body. What happens in the body influences the psyche. So you see, immunity is a psychosomatic issue. But it begins with the attitude. Do you want to live?
Yeah.
For what? For whom do you want to live?
But that's another thing which I think is quite topical in terms of for what do you want to live? Because I look at other things, and I know we're doing a lot of general touching on lots of different topics, and I'm sure we'll cover them in other talks. But the one thing which I notice in terms of human relations, we discussed a little bit before Rabbi Menace Friedman and how he works with couples in relationship therapy. But prior to actually there being relationships, should we say his focus is really on marriage. Excuse me, if we look at the modern world today, there are a lot of people that live in cohabitation. They feel that marriage is antiquated. It's a legal, and it is really a legal contract between the state and the two individuals. So there's a sharp rise, first of all, in cohabitation, but also there's a sharp rise in, and I'm not condemning single mother homes, but a lot of single mothers who are raising children without fathers, without a partner, before you get to working with the family unit, if that was the sort of basic fundamental, should we say, cell of a society, now it's like, well, I don't need to be relating or in a meaningful relationship with someone. I'm here for what I can get now. When I'm finished with them, maybe the parasite idea kind of works, and then I'm done with them, and I leave.
Look at the individual cell in your body.
Go somewhere else.
The individual cell in your body cannot live without its environment, and cannot live without being in a community with all the other 30 trillion cells your body counts.
Yeah.
250 million per day die voluntarily and being exchanged for new ones to take over. So this is only a mirror of our society. If we start looking at single cells without their environment, without their community. We are psychologically and sociologically looking at individuals and their demands and needs without their environment, without a community. Do you wonder that this kind of cancer is growing?
It is. Sorry, it is growing.
Oh,
It's growing like crazy.
yeah. So the religious scientists, no, the religion which is called science is devastating, and the science which is called religion is dead. And we need to do something about it, each of us.
Yeah, what kind of, I believe in the individual, that the individual needs to be, that you need to be an individual in a community. There has to.
Well, you need to be a person in the community.
Correct.
Not
correct.
an individual.
Correct. And that what's really happening is a sort of me world. The I me.
Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I'm still here. The sort of self. Willem, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. The sort of I wouldn't call it solipsism.
Solipsism.
Yeah.
Solipsism.
Yes, sir.
I'm the only one.
Yeah, I'm the only one. That's what it
That's
means.
Nietzsche.
And
Nietzsche. I'm on top of the mountain, but I can't stand that other people breathe my breath,
exactly.
breathe the air that I need. So I kill the other people.
And I think that's, to me, if there was any kind of social diagnostic, and I'd say this very, very carefully because I know, I'm probably wrong, but that's what I see. This is I see so much of it. Like no one is good enough for me. I'm better than everyone else. And this is coming from people, and I hate to say this, but I'd call them low effort, low quality. And I mean that in a sense that they put a little effort into what they do or who they are, and low quality in the terms of that, it's just like, love me as I am. I'm perfect.
No, these people have not been, what they lack is education. First of all, they lack love, unconditional love. Their mothers did not dedicate themselves to being a mother. They needed a career because economy demands that. Low wages, can't support a family without 2 jobs. So you have to. Then grandparents, which is the generation of my age and my children, they wanted to live life to the best possible, enjoying whatever. So they didn't have time for their grandchildren, which used to be the case. Also, our cultural heritage shows that in a family, the grandmother and the mother and the father of the child lived together 4 generations.
Yeah.
That had a very good purpose. First of all, the grandmother was in no competition with anyone and was dedicated to make sure that the grandchildren were raised well.
Yeah.
Because the mother had to work on the farm with her husband and didn't have time.
Correct.
And the grandmother took care of dividing, sharing. Why is that? Women share, men gather.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah. And they both serve an important function
And
together.
don't forget, the system was destroyed by 3 wars. From 1870 until 1989, we lived in a war zone.
Correct.
So, no wonder. The American history is even worse. The American history is based upon war. It thrives upon war. Think of the incredible amount of money and effort going into war.
Well, I don't think ever at any point in time. Maybe I don't know if it would eclipse the Romans dollar for dollar, but I don't think anyone has invested in so much weaponry and tools of destruction as they have.
And still do. And that is, now they have a new reason, a new enemy, which is called China. And the Chinese are doing the same.
Yeah.
They want to take their first position, their first rank, by force and violence. And that is the end.
Yeah. But you know, just looping back to what you were saying about how things used to be. Again, I'll refer back to. I was listening to the roles of men and women, should we say, in the 1600s, and it's interesting you mentioned that because, then there was really a patriarchal system, but the way how the lecturer explained it, it's just that first of all, most people balk at the term patriarchy, but he said, we need to consider it in different ways. He said, first of all, and what you
there was no patriarchy.
What you described.
It was female organized.
Yeah, but basically, actually, the system was organized around that. Is that actually the men went out and they would quite often, if you were living in the rural areas, you were working on farms, things like this. Men in many ways were actually given less freedom to do what they wanted to do than women were, because women, in between raising children, they had more flexibility to pick the kinds of jobs they wanted to do. They were filling in the gaps. Well, this is what historical record shows. So let's just let me just finish what I'm saying, and maybe you can add in what you know. So what he was saying was that it's like things like and I should really probably be more prepared in terms of these conversations to bring the actual information as he expressed it. But what he was talking about was that if there's a rural life and there's a city life, and that those in the city lives, those that belong to the guilds and various other trades, that you'd have a farmer who would bring in the wool, who would spin the wool into thread. It was the ladies, the women would do that. So they had a complementary role, and also what you were discussing is that until women could no longer, should we say, bear children, their role changed into being the sort of looking after the household, because the household was a much more extended idea then. They were bigger actually than what you would have today, that it was caring for everyone in it, looking after finances, expenditure, so there was definitely this sort of, I don't want to paint it as this romanticized idea. It was still tough, but everyone was playing their role, and there was a harmony there. And I'm not sort of saying that's in this day and age that women can't do what they like, but I think we have this kind of disconnect between, what's good for everyone and how individualism, or this extreme version. Sorry, carry on.
I tell you what, women nowadays have no choice.
What do you mean?
They have to work. They have to be
but women back then had to work as well. That's what I'm saying.
That's a different issue. In the past, there was this structure in which they could function. Nowadays, there is no structure in which women can function. They are slave laborers. They are paid 25% less than men doing the same job.
Yes, but that's not true, actually. That's a lie, Willem. It's actually a lie, because it's a lie. We don't.
We have 10 people in work.
Mm-hmm.
No? And I know what they earn. And I know that we don't underpay people. That is not our style. But I also know that someone who is working full-time is not able to live from what they get.
Okay.
It doesn't reach to the end of the month.
Sure.
They don't do exceptional things. They only live their lives and try to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. So as soon as they become children into a relationship, that's the end of full-time work. because there is no grandmother, there is no mother.
Sure.
So we have destroyed, economy has destroyed, for the sake of greed and money and power, have destroyed our social system. That's the problem.
But how do you then figure this into the kind of rise of, should we say, feminism, which has really taken itself into a sort of extremist ideology? A lot of victim blaming and stuff like this, and I mean, this is also part of the process. I don't need to have children. The next thing, I have a laundry list of requirements that I expect men to have, but I don't have to do anything. I mean, how does that work?
These people have been raised to think like that.
Like narcissists, like true narcissists. I mean, wow.
Yes, but that's not a prerogative for women. The men are not better. They're just like that. They want to have their lives and go after their wants, and don't want to be disturbed by women and children. And if they are, they commit. They're not committed. And that's the problem. The problem is we believe that combining types, that is, for instance, this program, Marriage on First Sight.
Yeah.
Here, types are being combined, and these types are not able to love, which is not able to be with the other person, because they believe that type will do, and type will not do. Type will destroy.
Sure.
And most of these marriages don't keep. The reason that I still am in a marriage is because she is with me and I am with her.
Sure.
So it's me saying, it's you that I love, and what makes a good husband? That's the one who makes his wife happy.
What is the wife's? Is the wife there to make the husband happy too?
No,
where's the reciprocal value then?
No, it's not reciprocal.
Why not?
Love is never reciprocal.
Yes, but surely the wife should be there to make the husband happy too.
No,
why not?
She isn't.
Why not?
The wife is biologically there to look after the children.
So the husband is superfluous.
She is the only one able to become a child. Men are not bearing. We don't give birth.
Yes, but men take on a lot of the financial responsibility of caring for the family. They have to sacrifice their time and their lives.
Oh no, their payment will not do.
Sorry?
No,
who's going to pay for that then? Who's going to pay for the clothes? Who's going to buy the food? Who's going to pay for the insurance?
Not the man. They will both have to work, because from one income, no family can be sustained.
Not in general, no. So, well, not unless you're sort of unless you're doing very well. So
we have been enslaved by economists to be productive robots, and there is no room left for people to develop into humane beings.
But tell me, just
being humane is out.
Just leaping back, women want equality, okay? Now, that's fine, good and great, absolutely. Equal pay for equal work, not a question of any doubt there. No one's going to ever question that. But I think what a lot of men feel frustrated about is that equality goes both ways. It's not just a skewed system that benefits one over the other, sort of affirmative action. And that's what it seems like society is turning into, where it favors the female over the male, and that women can't be questioned. Men just have to accept it.
We have a male-directed society, and no wonder we prefer females. When I was a student in the 1970s, one of my philosophy professors asked the question, "Why is a beautiful woman more interesting than the gospel?"
Why? You mean to a man?
Yeah, that's the answer.
What is the why is she more attractive?
So we prefer women to be attractive, And women have been taught to pimp themselves up to be attractive. And as soon as they are 35, they're out, too old. They have forsaken their own nature, their own biology, etc., etc. So we have a desperate situation, and really wages have been so low during the last 25 years that this development is where we got.
But just going back to the wage thing, it's actually there's this myth that they get paid less.
I'm sure.
Sort of. Well, no. We have to look at what kinds of jobs they do, how much they're in the job market for. It's true that
there's no equal.
No. It's not about equality of outcome. It's about equality of input, because
there's no social justice.
No, there is none. But the thing is that women don't do. There's not in any kind of professional job or type of job a 50-50 split, and that's not determined by shall we say patriarchy or sexism. It's just that women don't want to do sewage. They don't want to work in sewers. They don't want to work in construction. They don't want to do all the dangerous jobs. They don't want to do them. They just don't want to do them.
That. I know women who fly fighter jets. I know women who work on windmills 100 meters above.
Yes, but as a percentage of a female population, they're not that big. They don't want to do it. They don't want these jobs.
No. That's I know who is telling these myths, but it's not true. If
why isn't it true?
Because in the Soviet past, women and men did the same jobs.
Was it not just by necessity?
During the war, women did all kinds of industrial work, and as soon as the war was over, women were expelled from those jobs.
So you're saying that it's an interesting conversation. It's a very important conversation, actually.
Yes, so I'm not going into those discussions about social justice and equality and equity. I'm not doing that. I know what work is, and I know who does the work.
Sure.
And I know who dedicates themselves to work, and how hard it is to make a living from work, even if you have to employ 10 people in order to get your job done. We are being held hostages from our consumerism society, and they're trying to keep us like rats in a cage.
I can definitely see your point
and
of view.
That causes the problems.
Yeah,
that makes people aggressive.
I think that that there definitely is something to be said of using, should we say, consumerism, or who was it, Alan Watts, who talked about materialism as the sort of centerpiece of what is modern achievement. It's what you have. And I think that both men and women get stuck in this sort of mindset that it's what they have, it's more important than who they are. And just to clarify for myself, I don't agree with a lot of these whingers and moaners that complain about women this, that, and next. If you look at some of the most brilliant scientists in the world, it's got nothing to do with sex. I mean, some of the leading researchers in climate change and climate science are ladies who work on carbon sinks and all sorts of other things. Just recently, one of the leading scientists from NASA. There are a lot of great scientists.
Yeah. That's. I was to that.
It's. I mean,
this lady, Mrs. Johnson.
Yes,
Mrs. Johnson died. what was it that put some clowns on the moon?
Yeah.
Put all the American knowledge in apple pie, said Tom Lehrer.
I think it's a team.
Was Mrs. Johnson who brought them home.
It's actually a team effort. We need each other. We need to work with each other. I don't give a damn what. I don't personally. When I've been hiring people, I've never looked at their sex as an important factor. Not once did I consider that an important factor. I was like, well, do you have the skills, and are you interested? And even if you don't have all the skills, are you interested in learning them? That's all. That's all I cared about.
Yeah.
I didn't cross my mind.
So people are not raised to dedicate themselves to a task, other than outside, being beautiful or being successful, and if possible without work, because they have not been raised with the certainty, with the spiritual certainty that the world only works when we work. So
that's
we live in a world that is focused on leisure, on pleasure, and we forget that these two drugs, leisure and pleasure, are serving the ones who have other purposes, other goals, and those goals are power, infinite power, and whoever is not able to get the power gets to the money.
So would you say then, in a way, that it's sort of really a case that, and this is not conspirational, that those who run industries, they're interested in consumption more than anything else. Because I look at something in particular, what makes me kind of chuckle, the drinks industry, alcohol. They really are not interested in your average consumer. They're interested in your addicts, because those are the ones who are the heavy buyers. It's the same kind of logic that's applied. There's something called freemium in terms of gaming. So you'll see games that people play on their mobiles, and it's free, and I say that in inverted commas. So you download it, you play it, but if you want to progress and get the extra bits or extra bells and whistles, you start chipping in $1 here, $2 there, €1 here, and over time, what happens is that there's the sort of the guys who run the statistics and the actuaries behind it, they understand that they're using the 80-20 principle. Maybe 5% of the players make 90% of the profits these companies make, but that 5% of players are all addicted to the game. So, that's how they afford to do it. So,
it's not nothing that I said earlier. We are being enslaved. We are modern slaves, kept like rats in a cage.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that my response is, that's bullshit. We have, it's interesting again going.
That's okay. You may call that bullshit, but you just said 90% of the profits are made by the 5% of the addicts.
And these are tens of millions of dollars. It's not small money,
Yes.
It's not small money.
Show me the family where the mobile phone is not on the table during meals. Show me the family where the mobile phone is not near the ear when sleeping. Yeah. It's horrible.
What's interesting you say that, because you and I don't really communicate over the weekends. We keep it a special time, except for a few occasions. But I definitely try on Saturday and definitely on Sunday not to use my phone, or even not to use the internet, to take a step away from it.
Because
it's always there, and it was talking to, anyway, I think it was Werner Herzog, or maybe it was Peter Thiel, or perhaps Sam Harris, that they were discussing something along the lines of, I think it was Werner Herzog. Werner Herzog thinks that we're living in a time, there's different times where we have this different kind of fetishes. And now is the fetish of science and scientism and technology. Not that it's not a good thing. He doesn't say it's a bad thing. We should get rid of it. But he was making a comment that all these great minds we have, and all we can do is trying to figure out how to extract more money from everyone else. I think it was Peter Thiel talking actually about how this affects the problems that we solve in this world, that we have such a great intellectual power right now, but all we try and do is figure out how to take more money off of each other. That's the focus, you know. I mean, and he was saying that if you look at the sort of development of economy since the 1970s, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. How we can actually create economy, and the economy there is to provide for everyone, but it's ending up with the fruits of labor ending up in the hands of so few people, so that the actual capacity for, should we say, not just the material comfort of human beings, but but progress, if you put it in that, I don't know how to really define that, but it's being reversed. It's going in reverse, and what people are doing to compensate is that they're now taking out these bigger and bigger loans and debts, which are constructs of boomer logic. Yep. That with our capacities as we have them, we've never been smarter than ever before, but all we can do is just try to figure out how to squeeze each other more, and that's that is
the result of the Second World War.
What do you mean by that?
The result of fascism is to squeeze out the last drop of life from your slaves and make them pay for their own death.
Do you think that things have ever been really any very different? Actually?
No, they haven't been, but they were never organized.
Okay, so it was like beforehand.
Organized in an industrial way. That's the problem with fascism in the 20th century. It started to organize it in an industrial way, and the German army was defeated, but what was behind that survives, and it's not limited to Germany. It's not limited to Western Europe. It's all over the world. It is like a viral infection of autonomous human values.
Do you think this is why, and I'm not trying to get conspirational, but this is why at the end of World War II, the American government was so interested. I mean, they must have been fascinated how Germany could have withstood getting pounded on both sides and still managing to keep on going. I mean, it's a perverse miracle. But they want obviously drugs. But I mean, but the organization required to do that, to sustain that, that they thought, Jesus, if we could have something like this, we'd be pretty much in a good position. So taking on, the kind of, that the sort of German approach to manufacturing is very, very, well, it's very good. I mean, there's no one really manufactures like Germany. It's really something that they've really got down very well. That they took all the best scientists, social scientists, engineers, and they brought them to America to help. Well, basically, they didn't have jobs after World War II. To bring them into America to help, they were flush with money. They had made a lot of money out of World War II. It's like, well, here we go. And how do we continue developing our economy?
Everyone who lived in Germany, and had an education, was forced by the fascists into party-organized structures. So all the scientists were Nazis because they had a party book. They were forced to be members of the Nazi party. And then the Russians and the Americans came in, and both have harvested as many as possible people who could be extorted.
Okay.
Because they were Nazis. So they were deported to the United States, secretly, of course, because you can't import Nazis. Like Werner von Braun, who said, when missiles are up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department, said Werner von Braun and his fellows. At the same time, the Russians did similar things. And so that is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
The very kind of thinking which is behind fascism had infected the complete Western society. If you look at what happens in the United Kingdom nowadays, or you look at the history of the United States making guinea pigs of their own people without informing them, that's all Nazism.
Yeah.
At the Russians who are trying to undermine the European Union, undermine our social systems, it's all the same. And they sacrifice millions of.
Sorry, Willem, you went out there. Hang on a second. Problem with it. Sorry, you're back again.
Yes, on both sides of the lines, the idea of Nazism, of fascism, includes extortion of people, having them as slaves, keeping them as slaves. Those in power keep most of us like slaves. And that's not a conspiracy theory, it's bitter reality.
So would you say that...
Look at doctors in the hospital. Look at doctors in the hospital. Are they real medical professionals or are they slaves? Be honest.
I suppose, well...
They work 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
They are slaves. Are they free to practice medicine? No, they must go by the book. Who decides about the book? Those on top. Are they free? No, they are slaves. Look at nurses. You can name it. Mm-hmm. You can explain the system. The system works top down. And all the problems coming from the basis trying to get on top are due to that structure. The cause of all evil is injustice. And the injustice means people treated like slaves, kept like slaves, being soothed by material items, and you must have that, and you must have that, creating needs after needs after needs. And they took over the position of bad religion. But that keeps us small and stupid.
When you say bad religion, it's something that I wonder about, like, and I'm not criticizing Buddhism and Eastern philosophy as such, but it seemed that during the 50s and 60s there was an inflow of Eastern influences like Buddhism, sort of Indian spirituality into, should we say, the Western world. Because it seemed in a way, and I don't want to say like an easy way out, but it kind of like said, well, I detach myself from this world. It's all illusion. It's not real. I shouldn't worry about it. So I just have to go through the wheels of karma or whatnot, and therefore I'm not responsible, which I find is very interesting.
Yeah. It was a reaction on the inevitability of making dirty hands, getting involved into structures that any intelligent person would say, no, thank you, not me.
Yeah.
So you read a book like Zen or the Art of Motorbike Maintenance, and you knew what to do. So I bought myself a motorbike. Mm-hmm. I set myself on a small stool with a fresh beer and polished my motorbike until I knew every screw by heart. And I didn't have to bother with the rest of the world. That was in the time that I suffered from severe depression, but it worked. It worked.
Okay. And
the depression was, there's no place for you. You are not welcome. You don't play games. There's no place for you. You are too much for society to
tolerate.
bear with, to tolerate. Yes. So you used your intelligence for the wrong purposes. You studied the wrong subjects, so you don't fit in, and then you are worthless and useless, and that's the source of any depression.
Yeah, I suppose it's a sort of you kind of, well, you sort of collapse in on yourself.
You're gone.
And you're here. I can hear you.
Yeah, but I missed your last sentences.
Oh, sorry. I said that you end up collapsing in on yourself.
Yep.
But I think, something I could talk about my own encounters with depression. I realized, and I'll be honest about this, that I built a lot of the foundations of my own, what I would call foundational reality, on either not really looking at the truth, accepting it, or using false truths. And when those all came crashing down, there was just a vacuum, and I didn't know what to do. I felt abandoned by these false ideas, and then stuck. Just literally, I wanted to lie down. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to hurt myself, but I was just immobilized. Totally immobilized. And, but I think there's something interesting about the human spirit. After a while, I realized I can't do this. It's just not possible. I have to do something. And at that point in time, I started to take action. Any action really will do. And then got back up on my feet. It's like when a baby falls, as we discussed before, actually, when they're learning to walk. You're sitting on the ground, nothing's happening, and you're like, I must move. It's a part of being a human being. You must do something. Or else, if you don't, and you stay in that state, it gets worse. It's like the narrowing of your world. It gets so isolated, you end up with blinkers on. You
have two choices.
Mm-hmm.
It's either your imminent death or your imminent future.
Correct.
You have to choose.
Correct.
It's like a very, very old line from biblical literature. Today, I'll confront you with two options, with death and with life.
And it doesn't actually necessarily mean, because I think a lot of people, and I made this mistake myself, I'm choosing happiness. No. It didn't turn out just because I decided that the light bulb went on that suddenly everything magically would be okay, or that by a process of elimination, if I went through all these bad or terrible experiences, that somehow I would end up with a pot of gold. I ended up with a bucket.
Yep.
And I had to empty the boat.
Start
emptying the boat.
Yeah, that's true. That's what happens. And also, please take into account that generations now. My first computer was not an Amiga, but an English computer.
Sinclair, ZX Spectrum.
Sinclair.
Mm-hmm.
I know, precisely. Since that time, my life is under the keys.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
And kids play these games, these computer games. They start playing those at the age of 3. And as soon as they can manage to handle a mobile phone, they play these games. And it seems that real life is virtual and virtual life is real. And so these kids play games in which they can succeed because in real life they cannot succeed.
Or maybe
they compensate that.
Do you think maybe it's because that the immediacy of the instantaneous feedback from a game, let's put it this way. Today for me is going to be a long day. This is one of the highlights, even though actually our conversation in some ways is personally challenging, and I'm not having a conflictual relationship, but some of the ideas that we express are challenging in one way or another. But the most fulfilling part probably of my day will be this, even though it's hard, really, really difficult. And I have other difficult things going on, but in a way, this is one of the more meaningful things that I can do with my time, to challenge myself, because there's something else, and I will send you this link to this rabbi who said that, and he took, that in Judaism, he talk a lot about meaning and the challenge. He said that sometimes the struggle is to find the meaning. The meaningful bit is the struggle. That is the meaningful part. He said
his name is Tversky.
That's one of the rabbis. It's if you look at Eric Weinstein, I'll quickly have a look for you. Let's have a look here. Where is he? Who did he talk to? Definitely, Rabbi Tversky is. He's got some. He talks about that. What is the name of that rabbi there? Let's have a look quickly. Okay. Where we look here. Rabbi David Wolpe. Wolpe. Which interesting actually, in terms of conversations, because he also says, particularly about that Judaism is not a religion. It's really difficult for some people to understand that. But Eric's also Jewish, but Eric is like sort of an atheist, but he's still Jewish.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, what I really find fascinating sometimes, particularly about how I see conversations sometimes going between, and this is my impression of some Christian people, if you're a Christian but a non-practicing Christian, you are condemned. Like really, no one wants to talk to you, they're going to attack you. But if you're a Jew, who's a cultural Jew, and you're talking to a rabbi who's obviously like, a priest, they don't sit there and bash them over the head or try and talk down to them. I always find that fascinating, how that in some religious traditions, if you don't abide by the rules, you are a sinner, you're going to hell, you're condemned, you're damned, you're worthless. But it's interesting for me, and like Eric doesn't shy away from that. And the rabbi's like, well, I'm happy to be here, happy to talk to you, Okay, so you don't follow the sort of traditional approach. That's fine. It's not a problem.
Who cares?
Who cares? Yeah, he says, who cares? Are you trying to live a meaningful life?
If you consider yourself a human being, who cares?
Exactly. And that's another thing why people need to get rid of ideologies.
I always said Judaism is a management system.
Mm.
It's a history. It's a history on how to overcome awkward circumstances, failure, stupidity, cruelty. It's a management system that proved itself to be one of the most successful management systems thinkable. The Romans took out 6 million Jews. The Germans took out 6 million Jews. And look what is thriving, Judaism.
It's still going strong.
And look what has gone, Roman Empire. It's gone. Nobody cares. No? And look who is about to disappear in the world. I mean, it has an orange face and blonde hair. Playing his last card.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this election cycle.
Well, it was just a joke.
Yeah, no. I was just thinking about that because obviously this year is the re-election process for him.
Yeah.
But it's something fascinating, like Gary Kasparov was talking about, and I'd heard it somewhere else actually, that the best way to achieve a goal, if you're sort of kind of politically minded or a little bit sort of morally perverse, is to create as much confusion as possible and provide hints at solutions, but not really the solution. You create confusion and chaos, you blame someone else, you get everyone to focus the blame on them, you create more chaos, Um,
It's a dog game. When two dogs fight over a bone, the third comes and takes it.
yeah. And that's, it's interesting with Donald Trump that, that recently, I know it's mentioned by name, but, apparently some of the state apparati, in the States are sort of pointing at the fact that Putin, and we can put that in inverted commas because Putin is a representation of a lot of other people, are trying to help Donald Trump into power, and in a way, if you have this righteous indignation, it's like, no, this could never be, and no one would ever do that. But he's really saying the opposite. People are so they take things at face value, and this is another point actually that I think Sam Harris said that particularly these days amongst the left in terms of their political outlook, it's so easy to bait them. They will bite anything. Instead of just ignoring it, just ignore it.
That's why I say that people are really desperate. They have been living like slaves during the last 50 years, and they are desperately for a future. And then comes science and says there is no future. Your death is imminent. Our planet will be empty. So, no miracle that people are doing what they are doing. And as if I decided to condemn people about that, or to be judgmental about it, no, I can't, because I'm one of them.
Yeah, because we're involved in that. Sometimes
Yes.
Sometimes you can get caught in the trap when you don't realize you're in it, until you sort of go, oh my gosh, maybe I should just step outside of this a little bit and let it go.
We can't step outside. We are in it. We are part of it, and we are fighting with our minds to understand our positions, the truth about our existences, and think about this. Johann Sebastian Bach wrote so much music, so intricate. What would he say about modern music?
I don't think very much. I think
he would be desperate. He would be desperate.
I think he would feel really bad. But it's something I learned recently. Apparently, more people are turning towards classical music.
Yeah.
That there's a trend towards it.
Yes, of course. If you look at the pop composer, for example, from the 16th century, his name is, he lived in Hamburg, Telemann, Georg Friedrich Telemann. If you see people perform his music, they have fun. They're not on drugs. They have fun. They're young people. They are 15, 16, 17 years of Bach's Erben. They have fun. They are a community. They are depending on each other and letting each other thrive and improve and perform. And it's wonderful. If you see that, if you witness that, your heart opens up and says, life is such a wonderful thing. But if I look at whatever modern band on stage, it's such a drama.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mention that, because there's a sort of very polished and packaged music which comes out of Korea called K-pop, which is these manufactured bands, and they like present these sort of very squeaky clean images, but there's some of the things that go on behind the scenes are just eyebrow raising. But what's kind of interesting is that I was going to move towards looking at, in a way, like I think part of what we should eventually get around to, in a way, is because of something I've seen quite a lot of. There's a lot of conversation about what is prescriptive and what is descriptive, and there's an awful lot of description going on, and I wouldn't say we're guilty of that, but we're discussing it. But
It's so wonderful. It's Katif und Karei.
what's that?
Katif is what is written
Uh-huh.
in Hebrew, and Karei was what the rabbis are telling it means.
Aha. So,
No, nothing new.
nothing new. Is that and I've seen it particularly that there is quite a lot of discussion going on about a reorientation of a philosophical outlook, because we don't really have, in my opinion, as a philosophy as such, a meaningful philosophy in our world, in our modern world today, anything that really sort of resonates with anyone in a sort of, I wouldn't call it necessarily in a universal sense, but it's just so disconnected that there's definitely this attempt towards trying to find something, but I think that a lot of it goes, well, go and figure it out on your own. Now, okay, there's a certain amount that you do need to figure out, but I do think that, there is a certain amount of prescription that you can work with, not necessarily a sort of like a DIY 1 through 5 step process, but perhaps a series of questions or processes that you can use. Because as you said, there's one thing to think, it's another it's more important to live, because you live your thoughts. That I think, as part of what we're doing, I think we should look at what maybe some prescriptive things people can try out to start to question themselves, because unless you start asking questions about yourself, your behavior, your thoughts, your mindset, your attitude, you're never going to get to a point where you start to say, well, that's an interesting question. What do I really think about that?
Yes,
or how do I really feel? The question, the question is another, like the question is so important. It's just like, either you get like, here's the step 1 through 10, don't question it, rationale, this is the way it is, and it's quite often just a load of nonsense. Or else you get like, here's this kind of vague philosophical concept, and now from this kind of vague idea you should know what to do. It's not true. We live in a concrete world. Sometimes we need concrete solutions, like we discussed. Nutrition, what you're eating, how's it going? If you go to a nutritionist, or they will ask you, what are you eating? When are you eating it? Or even to look at like sleep. How are your sleeping patterns going? Do you shower every day? How's your teeth brushing going? Just basic things. And I think sometimes, people need to have these questions. So what do you think about the fact sometimes that there are these kind of gurus out there that just put out all this vague stuff, and it sounds really good. It's like sugar for the soul. But at the end of the day, they don't know what to do.
That's true. So there are no recipes for a good life other than asking questions.
Yeah.
The essence of the Jewish tradition is asking questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hear?
Like asking questions is the beginning of all wisdom. And wisdom is what you need to live a good life.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't question what you see, then you get what is prescribed.
Yeah.
So, if you do not know that there are no longitudinal research done on the results of vaccination, then you accept the legal obligation to vaccinate and forget about the lobby that made that possible. No?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I'm not against vaccination. I'm against these cocktails.
Okay.
Also, we got 6 vaccinations when we were kids.
Yeah.
And I'm exempted from any sort of vaccination because I got those 6.
Yeah.
Today, a baby gets between baby and a 14-year-old, there are 56 cocktails. 56 cocktails. I started doubting this procedure because of if you look at what is in those cocktails, there are things in those cocktails that don't belong in a kid's body, be it that it lowers the immune status and makes it dull and stupid. And that's what's created. I'm not saying without any ground that we are being kept like slaves.
Sure.
We must really pay attention. To pay attention is to ask questions.
But it's something interesting that you touch on there as well, because in terms of how grey matter develops, we have from the age of childhood to about the age of 20, we have a very high density of grey matter, and what happens is that it switches itself off as time goes by, only because it's just so that we can focus, because it's sort of like opening up attention to take in as much as possible. As you mature, your physiology knows that, okay, we now need to be able to have focus, so it starts to prune. But what happens as well is that you can actually open up those pathways again in terms of neurological plasticity by focusing on new things, But I couldn't imagine if in that sensitive time from the age of, I don't know, they've really measured, should we say, grey matter density from the age of 3, 4, 5, up until 20, that, the introduction, especially in those young ages, and you can refer back to Eric Weinstein's study on the development of cells amongst young, not just young mice, but amongst young organisms, that in essence, actually, growth is a form of, I wouldn't call it a form of cancer, but, cells are dividing very rapidly, and that causes growth. And there's a point in time where the cells switch off. It's like, well, we've reached maturity, so now it's time to maintain. It's the addition of new ones that grow without some sort of mechanism to stop that causes the various.
That was the lecture on drugs, on addicts.
Correct.
And addiction.
Correct.
So we learn as children we had to practice memory. Mm-hmm. So parents should sit down and play memory with their kids in order to develop memory, structures, brain structures, and. In modern life, we don't use that because we simply turn off. We just turn off the learning processes. We don't ask questions. That computers do that for us.
Correct.
So we don't need to know. When I was a teenager and I had to learn mathematic formulas, I said, why do I have to learn those? They are in the books.
Yeah.
When I have the book and the problem, I can solve the problem. Yeah. And the teacher said, oh, you have to know those formulas by heart. And I was bored by them. That's why I don't understand mathematics, because I refused to really sit down and eat these and digest these forms and learn them.
I know what you're saying. I had a similar thing as well, because I didn't understand what on earth this was for. But actually, the funny thing is that I've come to learn, and I have a regret now in terms of how mathematics was explained, in terms of this is a language that you can learn, and actually that there is a way of learning it. But it wasn't taught to us in a way. We were taught like like rote learning. Like Steiner talks about rote learning. He was and he learned mathematics as a language instead of learning it as how it's taught. And I think there's something to be said of some of the older ways of teaching.
You can communicate with this language in any any other language. It's a universal language.
Correct.
If you learn this language, you can forget your protest. This language is here to stay.
Exactly. This is what Steiner was saying. That one of the
and that's what Sinclair wrote in my manual from my first computer. Don't bother to protest. This language is here to stay. Learn it.
Because what Steiner was saying that he was invited to, I think it was him, after World War II, to go to the States, and he was at Princeton, I think, and he didn't know what the heck he was doing there because he felt out of place, and he was sitting there with, oh God, what's the name of the guy from the Manhattan Project, a very intelligent guy, not a very nice person apparently, but he said that, what was his name? Who was the head of the Manhattan Project? My brain is getting the best of me. Project.
I know he invented the atomic bomb.
Yes. What was his
Oppenheimer.
name? Yes, Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer didn't particularly like Steiner, but he wanted, even though he didn't like him, he wanted him there. And Steiner was there with people from all over the world. And he said that what was interesting with the mathematicians and the physicists, most of them couldn't speak each other's languages, like as in, you know, their normal day to day. But when they sat down, they could write equations and they could have jokes. They would laugh backwards and forwards, and it was the most incredible thing. It just, you know, and I thought to myself, man, I would have liked to have learned that kind of language. It would have been taught to me that kind of way. But in my education system, where, you know, in the country I grew up in, it was, I don't think, a particularly good way of teaching people, and it just turned people off. And I think, you know, I mean, especially today, I think because of all the, I wouldn't call it necessarily bullshit, but all the nonsense we get, to have some sort of understanding as to how to use this language, because the language of science is mathematics. To be able to understand a little bit more of it would enable you to try and pick out some of the truth, or else on face value you're going to allow the experts to determine what you should believe instead of being able to ask questions about it. It's just it's maybe now actually, Willem, in a very good way. Look at the positive side. Because of all the lies, we're now forced to have to go and find out what's perhaps the truth. And perhaps that's an upside to it, that, you know, once you do that, and you realize the value of that, then you might teach other people, your children, friends and family, those who are interested. It could actually work out in a way which is in reverse to what is expected of us, just to sort of sit there and take it.
Yep.
Maybe. Anyway, good sir, I think we've been going for like...
We must finish here, because I'm really tired.
Okay.
Almost 3 hours. We have almost 3 hours online now.
That was a good chat. I think what we'll do is, just so everyone knows, we'll probably have one long version and then break us into smaller parts. Right. I'm going to say thank you for now and speak to you soon.
Yes. Thank you for having this conversation.
Thank you too, Professor.
We're searching for sunshine. We're looking for a friendly place. A silver lining, a happy face, a little grin in that open space, and a chance to say